Please join me in welcoming Samuel Tadros.
Thank you for inviting me to speak here today and for the kind introduction. It's a great honor to attend ASMEA's 2019 conference and to be giving this keynote presentation here. This is my first time at your conference, but the conference and its founders is very dear to me. It was in October 2011 that I received a phone call from the late Fuad Ajami asking me if I would write a book about Egypt. I had met Fuad about a year earlier as I was thinking about my own scholarly career and found him someone in person, a giant, as he was as an author and a scholar. Both he and Bernard Lewis had a long career of scholarly work, but also I had admired them for their courage in standing against the current vulgarity that dominates Middle Eastern studies. The way Fuad pitched the book to me was quite interesting. He said, you know, I have this series of books that I'm running at Hoover with Charlie Hill. There's a book by Bernard, there's a book by me, by Charlie, by Russell Berman. Would you be interested to write us a book about Egypt? Now, my natural reply was, who do I have to kill? I mean, to write a book with these people was such an honor. He was a friend, a mentor, and both he and Bernard can be best described by the way that Georges Clemenceau, the late French politician and prime minister, described his friend Émile Zola. He said of him, "Men have been found to resist the most powerful monarchs and to refuse to bow down before them. But few indeed have been found to resist the crowd. To stand up alone against or before misguided masses, to face their frenzy without weapons, and with folded arms to dare a no when a yes is demanded. Such a man was Zola." Such men were Bernard and Fuad, but in their standing, they do not stand alone. As your conference indicates, there are others standing with them. But you didn't invite me here to hear me talk about Fuad and Bernard, but of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood and its future. As one of the oldest Islamist groups and with a presence across nearly the entire globe, it may seem natural that we begin talking about the Brotherhood's future from the present moment. But as I will argue, we need to go back in time to the very moment of the Brotherhood founding in order to understand and be able to describe its future. It is, of course, impossible to go through this long history of ideology, the structure, the political positions of the Muslim Brotherhood across the countries. But we must start with a very simple question instead. What exactly is the Muslim Brotherhood, and where does it fit in that spectrum of the Islamist universe? On the surface, the question seems quite simple. The Brotherhood, because it is an organization that is very rigid in maintaining a hierarchical order, certainly occupies a specific point in that spectrum. For some, that point may be the launching pad, the starting point for a process of radicalization whereby people move to more radical groups after the Brotherhood experience. For others, it is simply the counter to the other point on the spectrum, being the jihadi one. Of course, there is also the former DNI chairman, James Clapper, who famously described it in testimony to Congress as a largely secular group. But while the Brotherhood as an organization and membership is indeed distinct, the Brotherhood as an idea and where it fits into the Islamist world is harder to pinpoint. The nature of the Brotherhood's relationship to other Islamist currents is no less contentious. While there has been some work on the influence of the Brotherhood on other Islamist currents, less studied has been the influence of those currents on the Muslim Brotherhood. Was the Brotherhood's founder, Hassan al-Banna, a continuation or a break with his intellectual predecessors, such as Muhammad Abdu and Rashid Rida? What is the Brotherhood's relationship ideologically to the larger world of Salafism? The question of the Brotherhood's position in the Islamist universe is thus a question of the nature of the Brotherhood itself, not simply as an organization, but instead as an idea. This brings us to why Hassan al-Banna established his organization and what his vision for that organization was. By the time of al-Banna, the crisis facing the Muslim world had become more intensified. That crisis, the crisis of modernity, in the form of both the discovery of Western advancement technologically, economically, militarily, as well, which of course gave birth to Bernard Lewis's famous question, what went wrong? As well as the attempts at reform conducted by various local rulers as well as foreign occupiers, which resulted in a gap between Muslim conceptions of politics, of religion, of economics, of legal matters, and between the reality in which Muslims lived. That crisis had become impossible to ignore. The fall of the caliphate, the challenge of the foreign missionaries, all this led Hassan al-Banna to form his organization. Al-Banna was aware of those efforts by various reformers before him, and he found them lacking. He believed that the previous efforts had failed because they had either been limited in scope, Muhammad Abdu's focus on educational reform, or Muhammad Abdul Wahhab's focus on fighting heresies, or because they had not involved the Muslim masses and instead been elite efforts. His solution, his invention, was to do something the Muslim world had not seen before. It was both to be an organization with a very rigid structure and hierarchy. At the same time, it's a mass movement involving the entire Muslim population. And that organization and movement, that Jama'ah, as he described it, would be one that deals with the entire scope of the lives of Muslims. Its methodology for change would begin by creating the Muslim individual, moving to the Muslim family, Muslim society, these six stages that he described: individual, family, society, government, world Islamic government, and finally that ambiguous term he described as Ustaziyyat al-Alam, primacy in the world for that organization or for that Islamic state that he established. Now, what did that actually mean in practice? We have two striking statements by al-Banna about what his Muslim Brotherhood actually is. The first, he says, the Muslim Brotherhood is a Salafi da'wah, a Sunni order, a Sufi truth, a political body, a sports group, a scientific cultural association, an economic enterprise, and a social idea. The second statement, we are not a political party, although politics in accordance with Islam is deeply rooted in our ideas. And we are not a welfare organization or a sports team, although welfare and sports are part of our method. We are not any of these because these are all forms, techniques, or means designed for specific objectives and for a limited period of time. We are, however, an idea and a creed, a system and a syllabus, which is why we are not bound by a place or a group of people and can never be until the day of judgment, because we are the system of Allah and the way of His Prophet. We are the followers of the companions of the Messenger of Allah and the raisers of His flag as they raised it, and like them, popularizers of His way and memorizers of the Quran as they memorized it, preachers of His da'wah as they preached it, which is why we are a mercy for mankind. Now, the two statements, the two descriptions, could basically mean everything and nothing. They are, to say the least, quite ambiguous. The ambiguity of the description, however, was not the reflection of a man's lack of intellectual sophistication, but rather intentional. Hassan al-Banna's uniqueness and genius was precisely his ability to create an amalgam of all the Islamist ideas and currents of his time. Al-Banna's own background was a reflection of this diversity, from his experience in Sufi orders, Al-Azhar education, and Salafi ties with Rashid Rida and Muhibbuddin al-Khatib. Attempting to gather all these Islamist currents, of course, had a slight problem with it. It required to set aside all these issues that would divide people. Those issues that Muslims had been fighting over for quite some time. Again, to quote Banna, every issue that has no actionable ramifications, engaging in it is forbidden by Sharia as excessive. Among these are side judgments about issues that never took place, delving into the meaning of Quranic science that science has not reached yet, and talk of who is better among the companions of the Prophet and the disagreements that grew between them. Because by nature, any such talk would create divisions. And if your goal is to unite the entire Muslim world, then you don't want to get into those issues, whether it is the large Sunni-Shia divide or theological disagreements among the sects or the various schools of jurisprudence. The second aspect of al-Banna's founding vision pertained to the methodology adopted, namely the forming of a strong Jama'ah. In 2011, the Deputy Supreme Guide of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, Khairat al-Shatir, would reiterate this emphasis. We have learned in the method of the Muslim Brotherhood that this overall mission and these secondary goals can only be achieved by means of a strong Jama'ah. He goes on to quote the second Caliph, Umar ibn al-Khattab, there is no religion without the Jama'ah, and no Jama'ah without an Imam, and no Imam without obedience. In defending that emphasis on creating a strong organization, the Brotherhood simply argued this was the method of the Prophet himself. This is how the Prophet established his religion, by creating a group of people, a Jama'ah in Mecca, and that's the way that we follow. This, of course, meant, in reality, a focus on strengthening the organization, on a hierarchical structure, on a command, on people being obedient and fighting any deviance from that obedience and that order. Al-Banna's successors followed his vision by the letter. They maintained an organization that was characterized, as Israel Elad Altman described it, by its adherence to a set of final objectives and a rigid commitment to a core related principles, combined with pragmatism and flexibility as far as the strategy and tactics of achieving those objectives are concerned. There are no clear timetables to reach the goals, and gradual methodological progress takes priority. Those two aspects, the aspect of an ambiguous vision, an ambiguous statement on various theological issues, and a strong organization proved to be the reasons for the Brotherhood's success and longevity. It is due to these, of course, that the Brotherhood was able to sustain itself in face of various crackdowns by different regimes throughout more than 80 years. And yet those two aspects, abstract framework and strong organization, while being the sources of the Brotherhood's success, would also prove to be its fundamental weakness. The deficiencies of al-Banna's approach were simply intrinsic. The loose ideological framework that al-Banna insisted upon, setting aside theological differences and uniting people on an abstract goal, meant not only that the group was exposed to attacks by more rigid Islamist groups, but more importantly, it required a weak internal theological basis. Any examination of the kind of books that a Muslim Brotherhood member read would expose that weakness. You could read a few books by al-Banna. He wasn't a prolific writer. Maybe Hassan al-Hudaybi's book on preachers, not judges. The work of Sayyid Sabi on the Sunnah. But that was basically it. A couple of pamphlets here and there, comparing it to what a Salafi student would learn at the hands of his sheikh, exposed that weakness. And that, of course, meant that it opened the group to infiltration by more powerful ideas and individuals. Both phenomena would continue to haunt the Brotherhood throughout its lifespan and shape now its future. At the same time, the necessity of a mass organization would mean that the Brotherhood methodology was exposed to a serious crackdown by its opponents in the regimes. Al-Banna, as a charismatic character, could overcome these challenges. His successors would be less successful. And then came the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring came, and the Brotherhood thought that the world had finally become theirs. Success in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Libya, a state sponsor and supporter in the form of Turkey, funding abundant from Qatar, even in Yemen, even in Morocco, the king was forced to accept the Islamists as part of the ruling formula and invite them to lead the government there. A couple of years later, turns out the Arab Spring wasn't that good for the movement. Today, it is completely crushed and banned in Egypt. In Tunisia, it is forced to reshape itself and describe itself as post-Islamist even. In Libya and in Yemen, the civil wars has surpassed the Brotherhood. And in Syria, people are now drawn to very different groups, more radical than the Brotherhood. So across the region, the Brotherhood is facing tremendous challenges. These challenges, of course, are now being more compounded by the reality that in a place like Egypt, they can't even operate, and only in Turkey and Qatar do they maintain a safe haven after the Saudi change of position towards the Brotherhood. Now, what does this all mean for the future of the Muslim Brotherhood? Let me offer a couple of thoughts here. First, outside of a few die-hard faithful, it is quite obvious to anyone watching that the Brotherhood methodology has simply failed. This is not to suggest that other Islamist methodologies have been more successful, whether the jihadi one or the various Salafi ones, but that today, even by Brotherhood members, there is a realization that we simply have no answer to the crisis that we are facing here today. That is even more compounded by the failure of the Brotherhood to find an answer to the Sisi regime in Egypt, to the reality of the repression that they face, and invent a way of how to deal with that regime. Simply put, there is no rational reason today for a young religious Muslim to be joining the Muslim Brotherhood. There's a supermarket of full of more attractive groups that he can join. Secondly, the infiltration of ideas, this slow change within the Brotherhood itself, has created internal problems. Because the Brotherhood lacked any strong indoctrination in terms of serious ideas, outside of a rigid commitment and obeying orders and the high ranks, the result has been that other Islamist ideas have been able to enter and gain supporters there. The Brotherhood leadership itself contributed to this by virtue of their alliance with more radical Salafi groups while in power in Egypt, and then their alliance with them after being kicked out of power as they all gather in Turkey through these TV channels. Today, on a Brotherhood TV channel that is broadcasting from Turkey, you cannot distinguish between the language of a Muslim Brotherhood member and between that of a radical activist Salafi calling on people for revolution. Even committed Brotherhood members have adopted a lot of these ideas and language of the Salafis. Thirdly, for all the Brotherhood's literature about regime repressions in the past, the Brotherhood has benefited from what can be best described as half-open societies. By this I mean societies such as Egypt under Mubarak and Sadat before him. Ones where power is solely the domain of the state, of the regime, but where at the same time society is allowed to move a bit, where there is some element of criticism, where you're allowed to organize, to form political parties, or to hold meetings for you. Today in Egypt, at least, that is no longer available. The Brotherhood is first and foremost a jama'ah, a strong organization. Ideas cannot be killed, but organizations, as the Brotherhood is learning today, can be ended and killed. With the public square close to all forms of organization, the Brotherhood has been unable to simply recruit, to hold those sports events, soccer games that attract young members to them. There's no charity network any longer providing services to people. There's no support for members. There's no mentorship program to build these bonds of brotherhood that are the center of the organization. For all these reasons, today the remaining members of the Muslim Brotherhood are either in prison, a lot of them are in the case of Egypt, or on the run, or outside of the country, escaping to Turkey, to Sudan, to Qatar, and Malaysia, the 4 countries that have welcomed them. We don't know whether the new government, of course, in Sudan will change that. Fourth, as a result of all of these, the Brotherhood is today suffering from a serious divide within its rank. There are no good guys and bad guys in this fight. Both of them share a similar ideology. But there's a fight internally over organizational command and over methodology of dealing with the regime. From those who hold slogans of anything that is below bullets is peacefulness, to those more willing to engage with the bullets. None of them is of course a truly peaceful reflection or argument in dealing with the state. But because of these, because of more importantly, as a hierarchical organization, once the Egyptian regime was capable of removing the first, second, third, and fourth layers of leadership, the organization is today leaderless and thus deeply divided. This divide became very clear, even for any observer, when a Brotherhood leader in Egypt is killed by the regime, and the 2 factions in Turkey, where they all are today, can't even hold a prayer together. And 2 separate prayers are held for the guy, because these 2 leaders of the Brotherhood don't share a prayer even together. Fifth, the events of the past few years, from the Brotherhood's own failures in government, turns out Islam is not the solution. Turns out that the Brotherhood doesn't have an answer to the problems facing people's lives, that the quality of the Brotherhood leadership, because of the repression of any free thought inside the organization, has meant the elevation of mediocre characters who are simply incapable of governing a country like Egypt. And also because of the level of atrocities that the Islamic State especially, but also other groups, have made people in the region see in practice. For those reasons, there are many people across the region that are not only questioning the Muslim Brotherhood, but questioning the very premise of Islamism and Islamist politics in the first place. 6, because of the deep sectarian divisions that now dominate Middle Eastern politics, the fight between Sunnis and Shia, and the Brotherhood not having an answer and not wanting to become part of that fight, because of that, it has become increasingly irrelevant, not just to Arab regimes, but also to the very masses that now buy into this sectarian division and war. Now, where does this leave the Muslim Brotherhood? It is possible that we will soon be writing the obituaries of the once invincible group. In fact, that has happened before. For in truth, the Brotherhood did not survive Nasser's crackdown. Had the Islamist revival not been taking place on university campuses when the Brotherhood leaders came out of prisons after 20 years imprisonment, it is doubtful that the Brotherhood would still exist today. But another possibility presents itself. The deep popular rejection has meant more isolation for the group. Families have split, friendships broken over the Brotherhood. A wall of separation is increasingly between those committed to the ideology and the rest of the population. Perhaps more important than the military repression has been the fact that this continues to be supported by a vast majority of Egyptians. It is not inconceivable in this regard, if these trends continue, that the Brotherhood would become more of a religious cult and not the mass movement that al-Banna envisioned. We tend to think of branches of Islam, of sects of Islam, as things that developed in the past due to centuries-old differences and fights, and not as modern phenomena. But perhaps the possibility exists that we are witnessing today the birth of a new sect within the Islamic world. The future is still an open question, but one thing is certain. As a sympathetic journalist to the Muslim Brotherhood wrote, the question is not whether the Muslim Brotherhood will change, but how it will change. Thank you very much.